I'm going to start recording. I am recording right now. It is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Scott Replogle. He's a medical doctor, and he will be talking to us today on the issue of his philosophy and I'm sorry, Scott, I just lost words. We're going to be talking about authoritarianism and Scott's personal view of this with whatever he wants to say about it. It is my great pleasure to introduce Scott, and I ask everybody to give a round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm gonna sit if everybody can hear me. And how Ralph, how do you want me to advance the screen?
Just point at me and I'll advance.
I want to pass around some books here, and they can end up back here. The speaker that we had a couple of weeks ago that I was interested in, I'm halfway through the ones, very good on economics. These are two books that I reference in my talk. One is relatively new, and I'm really into the science of fear, or the aspect of the use of fear in science. And these are two that are relevant to the title, or to my talk, but aren't necessarily, I mean, I haven't just read them or anything, but I thought you all might want to be aware of them, so there's two on that. Inviting me to speak on this. This is a topic that I have thought a lot about, read. I probably should write a book about it, but I've so far just at the talk standpoint, and I certainly would welcome any and all questions or concerns. I'll try to keep it cut to a reasonable level. I don't want to drag it on if we get going too far here. So let's hit the first slide.
Okay, we are on the first slide.
Okay.
What do you mean is the next slide?
Next. Okay. South Park refers to the two authors of the TV cartoon show South Park, and I'll reference that further, but specifically it means I'm not a Republican or Democrat or conservative or a liberal. And the small L in libertarian means the philosophy of libertarianism, not the political party or aspect of it. As far as origin of ideas, I want to stress that I don't consider these original ideas that I thought up out of nowhere. I don't have a particular reference to them, but I don't think it's appropriate to make it look like I thought this all up. My opinion, as I said, is based on my reading. It's really an opinion, not science. When you get into psychosocial concepts, this is not proven, this is not science, this is basically philosophy and opinion. But two take-home points that I want to stress. One is that most people are authoritarians, and I'll define what I mean by that, but that's one of my major points. The other one is that the political scale left to right that we currently know and see is outdated, misused. It really is worthless. And the real political scale is a scale of authority and the use of force, which I'll get into a little bit further, but that's really my take-home points. Next. So the definition of an authoritarian, not really authoritarianism, it's an authoritarian, are those people who need and believe in or defer to an authority to tell them what's best or right and wrong. In other words, they don't feel they have that ability themselves. They have to defer to some other authority. They basically can't see how anything can function or run without a system, a program, someone overseeing it. You see this commonly in things like evolution, where there's got to be an intelligent designer here. It can't possibly run without that. They also tend to see things as labels rather than individuals. So the other is deferring to experts, bosses, or someone they view as running things. Basically, they can't feel comfortable without a belief. It's like not believing in God leaves people very uncomfortable. It's like, well, what is there if I don't believe in God? So authoritarians, whether secular or religious, have to believe in some authority. When it comes to God, obviously God's not walking around or running for office, so they have to then defer to people on earth speaking for God.
Scott,
Yes.
quick question. Do you want to be interrupted by questions, or do you wish to just talk and then respond to questions?
No, I think if it's relevant, you can...
Okay, we have the gentleman behind you who wishes to ask a question.
Just wanted to comment on The Discovery of Freedom, a book by Rose Wilder Lane, where she comments that human beings advance when they believe they were responsible for what happened, and they were stagnant when they believed that some authority was responsible for life. Fate, God, the people, whoever it wasn't them that made the future. The 3 times in all of history where people felt responsible were the ancient Hebrews, the medieval Saracens, and the early American Republic.
Thank you. That's very relevant. That's really what I'm trying to get at. The other is that people who believe in an authority are often willing to force their beliefs on others because they know they're right and the other people that don't believe that way are wrong. And that's where we get into a lot of problems. Next. So here's the quote, the famous quote that got me into being a South Park libertarian. There's actually a book about South Park Republicans, but to me I'm not a not a Democrat, not a Republican. Next. So as I said, the actual political spectrum is not left to right. It's from anarchy on one end, complete absence of authority, to dictatorial or totalitarianism on the other end. And I see religious beliefs, secular beliefs, political parties as all being on basically the same side of having and using authority, whereas libertarians are on the other side that don't accept or believe in authorities and take personal responsibility for their actions. Next. So here's the other South Park author. This quote isn't quite as well known, but basically I see conservatives, liberals, Democrats, Republicans as all being on the authoritarian side end of the spectrum. Next. Now, by my definition, I think about 85% of people are fundamentally authoritarian, whether it's secular or religious. And I obviously can't prove this. It depends on your definition, and there really is no way to prove it. But it does go along with the idea, and I forget who expressed it, but about 15% of people are libertarian, whether they acknowledge it or not. Basically, it's the people that aren't authoritarians. And it ranges from being sort of non-authoritarian to actually being actively anti-authoritarian. So I consider this sort of a fundamental trait, sort of like being right-handed or left-handed, or being, say, gay or heterosexual. I mean, it's basically something that is part of you, and you're really not going to get argued out of it or changed by someone making some statement or argument about it. Next. So when you're looking at this, people are pretty aware of, and it's pretty obvious that when people are religious, they're deferring to God as an authority, but again, God's not present and talking on earth, at least currently, So they're really deferring to someone on earth speaking for God. With the secular type, it's much less obvious, and it generally conforms to socialism and its variants, although there certainly are other examples of authoritarianism that isn't that's secular, that isn't religious based. But socialism is really the idea that the believer or someone they believe in knows what's best for others or for society, and usually is willing to use government to force it. To me, that's the fundamental definition of socialism. The others are variants, like fascism is people that know what's best for the country, communism is what's best for the world or for a class of people. But they're basically people who are authoritarians, either themselves or someone they believe in or refer to. Bill?
I brought up to a person who's got great pensions from various government organizations, just retired, and I mentioned that there's a lot of people that believe in religion, the religion of government, sort of an accidental religion.
Right, that's kind of what I'm saying.
So I found that kind of clarifies that, by golly, the government's everywhere, they're all knowing, they're all seeing, they're all powerful. It's all those things that you say about, God if you're in a church. So
right.
To me, it's they're likely to be atheists and not really even recognize that they do believe in religion.
Right, and I'll kind of get to that. That's exactly what I'm saying, is the commonality is authoritarianism. They're deferring to an authority, not necessarily God. Mm-hmm. And even the religious, ultimately, it's someone, a human on earth, not because God isn't talking directly. But that's the point, is that authoritarians can be secular or religious, and it's really the same. Next. So here's what it means to do without an authority. You can't. It's like not believing in God. It's the absence of belief in something, or something like truth. It's not, as I'll mention, it's not a counter belief. It's not like a competing belief or a different system. It's basically absence of belief in an authority. And it's not acknowledging an automatic authority to anyone. You're basically depending on yourself as the authority and not someone else. It's also not being a type, which is what I stressed about, not being a Democrat or Republican or even a capital L libertarian. You're an individual, not a label or a type. And the absence of belief, I've run into this argument repeatedly where someone will just say, well, you're just talking about a competing belief system or religion. No, the absence of belief is not a system or a belief. It's the absence of it. Next. So, got the next?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. So, politics really is all about dealing with government as an authority. If the government wasn't an authority, what purpose or what need would there be for politics? And libertarianism is basically, again, the absence of government as an authority.
Scott, do I have the right screen?
No, you want to add one. Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Thank you.
So the other point is that people in authority, people in government, for example, there's nothing really magic or something unique about them. They came from the same people that some folks think are too stupid or too dependent or too whatever to take care of themselves, so they have to have a government authority. Well, who's that in the government authority? It comes from the same people that were too dumb and stupid to do it from themselves. So again, authoritarian is the belief that you or someone you believe in is somehow an authority, just like someone in religion. How did they get that? Well, they basically declared themselves that, and people accept it. So my point is the problem, or the fundamental problem, is religious or secular belief systems gaining government power. That to me is the hola.
I had
Okay, next.
Scott?
Yeah.
Along that line, I think what you were just describing was that there's a belief in it that the sum is greater than the whole of its whole.
Yeah.
And
Well, that
there may be
someone who gets into that.
circumstances, but certainly in authoritarianism, they are actually creating a sum that is greater than the whole of its
Right.
parts.
The feeling is that I'm an authority, therefore I'm the authority, or I'm the, I'm it. Whereas those people, really, there's nothing fundamentally different or better about them. They just got named or selected or somehow viewed as the authority. Okay, so relating to science, science is often used as an authority. And good scientists don't view anyone as having an authority or having the truth or the faith or the right answer to things. Science really should be anti-authoritarian. But you still see it, even within science, but mostly outside of it, used as an authority when it suits the person and their beliefs. And I passed around the Structure of Scientific Revolution, which is sort of the textbook on how science progresses and how authorities, or the paradigm, it's very difficult to change it. It sort of has to die out and new one come along. And that's often what we see with other types of authorities. This Daniel Gardner book is very good. It shows how fear is used by authorities to get people to believe or do things that they feel they should do. It's really quite an interesting essay. Next.
The fear makes people stupid.
Yeah.
So one of the things you can do, it's easier to buffalo somebody if they're scared, because they're not as smart as they would be if they were calm.
Well, remember, authoritarians think they aren't ultimately responsible, that someone else knows more than they do. And so if someone uses fear on them, they will fall under that, because they figure, well, I don't know, I'm just, little old me. They must know what they're talking about. Whereas non-authoritarians would say, well, I'm not going to believe that person just because they say that, or just because they say they're a scientist or an authority or a politician, whatever it is. And so that's kind of the fundamental difference that I'm trying to get at. I was getting into, I'm always been into lyrics and music, and when I was doing this, I got into Stevie Wonder's song Superstition, but it somehow seemed relevant, so I stuck it in there. These are examples. How are we doing on time? Are we?
It's your call. It's now 1:10. However long
Okay.
people want to stay, and however long you want
Well,
to go.
I thought I would bring up some of the words that are used and abused in relation to authority. One was truth, which is really a religious concept and not a scientific concept. And we often see these days about facts. Well, what are facts? Well, they're what someone accepts as facts. They aren't necessarily some perfect example of something. They're open to interpretation. I mean, there's all kinds of things where facts are not necessarily the truth.
Facts.
And justice, of course, that term's used and abused a lot by the people in authority who think they know what justice is for somebody. But my current favorite is access, where the thinking is, if you can't have whatever you want or think you need for free given to you by someone else, you don't have access to it. Well, that's an authority speaking. If people have their own authority, unless you physically prevent them from having access to something, they would still have access. It's just that they're not given that because somebody thinks they deserve it or want it or need it. So these are terms that I thought were relevant to the discussion. Next. In medicine, when we get into this, you see this in what I call protocol medicine, is where the idea is you're too dumb, don't think, just follow the protocol. And you see this, of course, in government and all kinds of things, but I saw it in medicine all the time. So we can solve this problem, we just have to have a protocol, and nobody can vary from that, just follow the protocol and the problem will be solved. It's sort of like gun control laws solving gun violence. Another one is that authoritarians tend to think of people as labels, sort of like racism. It's like if they have this characteristic, then they are a whatever it is, whereas non-authoritarians view people as individuals and don't lump them into groups and treat them individually. The other issue is the absence of authorities. True anarchy, I don't think, can work for a large, complex society. I think you have to have something with physical power enough to protect from those who would abuse their power over others. And so it isn't as simple as saying, well, we don't need any authority at all.
You had the classic, right?
So that I think relates to this as well. It's not pure anarchy that we're talking about. It's just basically not accepting someone as an authority just because of who they say they are or what their position or something like that is. See, I think I got one. Yeah. Next.
Did I do two?
No. Okay. No, that's it. So this gets into economics and how systems can work without someone controlling it from the top down, and this is what authoritarians cannot get. It's pretty easy to see in evolution, and there's some people that just can't see how evolution could possibly happen without someone running it from above and saying, well, here's what progress is, here's how we're going to get there, and so on. In economics, it means how can a complex economy run itself without someone deciding what the correct wage should be or what the correct tax should be or whatever. It's basically the idea that centralized decision making can work without an authority. Now, it does have to have stable rules or laws. In other words, it can't be totally random. But you don't need an authority or central planning or top-down controls for something like an economy to run properly. And this is what most people who are authoritarians cannot grasp that, can't accept that. So basically that's the reason why government always grows, because nobody can accept the idea that government, that we could do anything without government providing it for us. So the next. So I put up some examples here. I've addressed some of it, but if we have time or if anybody has interest in some of these terms, I think to me, the interesting one has always been atheists, or people who don't believe in God. Doesn't make them something even like an atheist necessarily. It just means they don't have the belief in an authority. But that's very hard for most people to do. when you think about it yourself, usually most people do have some authority that they defer to, whether it's God or someone on earth. So I've had arguments and discussions about this, and as I said, I often hear the one of, well, if you're an atheist or a libertarian, you just have a different type of ideology or whatever. No, that's not the way I'm talking about. I'm talking about the absence of a belief or a system or a program or anything to run things. Basically, it's you, the individual, making choices based on what you think is important to you, taking responsibility for your choices, and then adjusting them if they don't work out in the real world, rather than depending on somebody else to tell you how it should be and whether it's working or not. So I think that's it. Yep. Yes.
You went earlier in your presentation. You said that you thought it was inherent in the, I presume, the personality or the character of the
Right.
person. And one of the things, you know, as inherent as, say, homosexuality versus heterosexuality. That would come about.
Right.
With how is it that we actually become an authoritarian? Are we born that way? Or,
Well, I would say that's
or are we the exceptions
Right.
in some kind of mutation that's going on with evolution?
Well, first of all, there's no way in psychology or genetics currently to even address that, but the concept to me is that's the default position. That's the way most people are. They don't become that, they are that. But there are exceptions, like why are some people left-handed? Well, it wasn't because they changed to that or learned that, it's just those people were left-handed. And I think that's, I mean,
And you think
obviously
that applies to authoritarian.
well, the concept I think does. It's not as simple as being left-handed or right-handed, but the point I think is that most people are fundamentally authoritarians, and about 15% are not for whatever reason.
If I can summarize then, are you saying we're born that way or not?
Well, born that way implies a genetic thing.
Become the nature versus nurture.
Yeah, I mean, are you born left-handed, or do you become that way? I don't know that that's relevant or can be really looked at. I'm really looking at the overall psychosocial philosophy here and trying to describe how most people are authoritarian and a small percentage are not. But it's not clearly defined, and no, I don't really, I guess I can't say the answer to your question.
Linda?
I can-
Yeah.
Oh, Linda,
I can
Linda,
Yeah.
Linda, we have other people, so it's gonna be Ken, Linda, Blake, and then Ralph.
And-
And Bill.
Couple
And
points.
Linda.
Yeah.
You say it's not measurable. I think we have just to devise a better test that determines it. And I know that the Nolan test found 32% of people were libertarian. So I'm more hopeful, but you might be right, it's a small fraction of people. We can envision tribal survival situations, and the modern human consciousness has come a long way since we were in that primitive term. The other thing I would toss out is the simple system of parent, adult, and child. And we all have all three of those, but most of the time the populace wants the government to tell us what healthcare choices to make. And that is the dangerous authoritarianism, is people want to be forever children.
That's a good way to put it, because children almost necessarily have to defer to authority while they're children. both physically and legally. But yes, once you are no longer a child, then I think it's a question of how many people do still view themselves as independent versus defer to some other authority, whether it's religious or otherwise. Linda, was Linda next?
Yeah, it's going to be Linda, Blake, Bill, Ralph. Anybody else?
Heidi.
Heidi.
Well, let me interject a ray of hope here, but I think a lot of people in the field of child development would say that it's largely about the type of parenting that children are exposed to. They talk about authoritarian parenting, because I say so.
Right.
Santa Claus is always looking, say your prayers, yeah. They teach a type of morality that is, the authority for it is outside of the child.
Right.
There's authoritative parenting where children are taught more to reason things out. Why don't we hear our friends? Why don't we do this? So the person has to look to themselves for answers.
Right.
And then there's the permissive.
One of the reasons I viewed myself as anti-authoritarian or not authoritarian was that I rejected that from my parents very early on. Mm-hmm. I refused to accept what they said as the way it should be. And of course that created some problems which were much easier when I went off to college. But that's kind of where I see that some people are just that way. But you're right that you can definitely sort of push in one direction or the other.
And I'm sure the community has a lot of influence as well. One other point I would say is that I tend to see that authoritarians really bothers me because they crave consensus. It's not enough that the authoritarian power might be in control.
Right.
They want everyone to agree with them.
Right. That's one the reason they use the term democratic and attach it to something like socialism. That makes it look like this authority is coming from the people. And so democratic makes it seem less dictatorial or less authoritative. But I would agree with your point that that's a strong aspect of that is
Like atheists are considered a real threat.
Yeah, it's basically part of what I was saying is that if the authoritarian knows what's right, either because of them or someone they believe in, and so someone who doesn't believe that or doesn't agree with that has got to be wrong, has got to be stupid, has got to be, dangerous. And so comes in is because they feel better if everybody at least acts as if they're agreeing with the authority. Okay, who's
It's
next?
Blake is next.
So I'm glad Linda went before me because I really like what you said, but it kind of answers my question. And you mentioned that perhaps we're hardwired at birth to question authority, okay, as you were.
Or not accept it. Yeah.
Or not accept it. Right. My question is, are we doomed? Will we never have a free society because so many people believe in such an centralized authority?
To be frank, that's the way it looks like to me. I mean, that's why, the U.S. Constitution was set up beautifully to try to avoid that. But government always grows. It's the ratchet effect. It's the idea that no problems can be caused by the government, and the answer to all problems is more government or more money, which is what authoritarians think. So I would have to say I'm not real hopeful to it. I think maybe if you could secede as a state and form a different state or country, you could at least start over. And maybe things will change over time, but I wouldn't be real optimistic about that because I think those people are authoritarian.
It's Bill.
Yeah, this is just from way out in left field. It's another encouraging thought, but it's from way, way out. This is from the woo-woo world. Humanity was actually put on this earth. We don't come out of the regular lines, and we were put on this earth as a slave race to the people that built the pyramids. And shortly after they built the pyramids, there was something happened, and the masters departed. So from the woo-woo perspective, we were genetically, maybe 5,000 years ago, brought here to be slaves. The masters left, and now this wild freedom gene is growing in the population,
Right.
and it's been growing for thousands of years. We may see ups and downs, but the people that are not authoritarians seem to have a nice survival thing, so evolution may be favoring the non-authoritarians. That's it. The world from way out in left field.
But relative to that, to woo-woos, for example, I think authoritarians cannot accept that something could happen without a plan, you know, that it was random or what, you know, couldn't be as simple as it looks like. And so that's where conspiracy theories come from. They have to have an explanation for this because they can't accept the possibility that it didn't, you know, that it had no plan or meaning or was random. Most conspiracy theories are like that. It's like there had to be somebody behind this running it, and I can't accept that that wasn't the case.
It's going to be Heidi. I'm sorry. It's going to be Ralph, Heidi, Ken, Dan, and then Linda. Anybody else? Okay. So since it's my turn now, in terms of woo-woo, I have a different explanation. It turns out that in ancient Egypt, some astronomers determined when the floods were going to come to flood the Nile for planting purposes. And this was a closely kept secret. And instead of saying, this is when it's going to happen, they said, the Pharaoh is going to make it happen on this date. You better get yourself ready. Now think about that if you're a poorly educated person and the floods come when the Pharaoh says the flood is coming. So just think about that. My other point I was going to make...
Can I address that?
Yes, of course.
There's the situation where gurus predict the end of the world, and then that day arrives and it doesn't happen, and the believers still often believe in them. They can't accept that this person is not an authority.
This is science in the being used as a mechanism to instill fear in a populace. I mean, if I was somebody who didn't know about the floods, and somebody said the flood's coming in a week, get your stuff ready, and the flood comes in a week, and they do it year in and year out. As a reasonable person, I would think that the king, the pharaoh, the whatever, the powers that be, they are godlike. I'm going to make one more point, then I'm going to get on to Heidi, Ken, Dan, and Linda. Linda, I would like you, when you have a chance, to address this issue of science versus truth, because we've had something of a discussion on this. So I'll let you think about that for the moment. Heidi.
Yeah. I have a comment and a question. You're talking about how tyrannies can sort of hide behind the word democracy, right? Isn't the official name of North Korea like the People's Democratic Republic of North Korea?
Yeah.
I mean, what a joke, right? Yeah. And my question is, do you think the younger generation today is more authoritarian? Probably because a lot of young kids, they never had any free and unstructured independent play like our generations did. Out for hours independently, just roaming around and just settling their differences. They always have, you know, a parent, a teacher, a coach. All their play is structured. There's always somebody else to settle their problems.
Well,
maybe that's why they're such fragile snowflakes, as they're called.
My theory, to the extent that, as we said, you're sort of born that way, is that kids today are not fundamentally different. Now, there may be some influences that tend to exaggerate the authoritarian thing, or in some areas like the latter 60s or something, where it was going against, everybody was going against authority, supposedly. But I guess my theory, if I had to be pinned down, is that kids today are really the same, and yes, the environment that they grow up in is different, but there's still going to be about 15% or so that are going to be anti or non-authoritarian, and about 85% are still going to defer to some authority. Now, I think it's also more secular these days than religious.
Yeah.
I think that trend is definite. Secular authorities are taking over for religious authorities, but in terms of the overall authoritarians, I don't see it as being different today.
So if they were free-range kids, they wouldn't be more apt to trust freedom and free markets?
Well, again, you might emphasize or push in certain directions, but I think if I'm correct that people are sort of fundamentally authoritarians or not, then that really wouldn't change things particularly in the overall percentage. Maybe, you know, the edges of any of this are going to be poorly defined. It might push somebody in one direction more than the other. I mean, even like transgender and things like this, where you think, well, it's obvious, or either this or that. Well, no, there are some situations where it's a little fuzzy what your gender is, and there are people like that are ambidextrous. They aren't all left-handed, right-handed. They use both sides. So there definitely could be some fuzziness or some emphasis going in one direction or other.
We have Ken, then Dan, Linda, Larry, and then Blake. Anyone else? Okay.
On the woo-woo theory of things, I recommend Tellinger, Slave Species of the Gods. It was more than what you admitted, Bill. It was that they guided evolution to have slave workers to get the gold to take back to their planet and save their atmosphere. And these things are corroborated in the plate tablets of the Sumerians and other ancient records. There were two half-brothers. One of them favored more capability and independence for humans. The other said, oh no, absolutely not. And those two strains are still fighting to this day. If you look at chimpanzees or other primates, you have a youthful desire to go 2 ridges over, and they get slapped around by their elders when they come back. But when they need to change hunting grounds, they'll say, by the way, what was over there? Is it safe to go? So human beings seem perpetually in that youthful test authority and break out from there, and it has done us a fair amount of good. In terms of the causative theory of history, often mislabeled conspiracy theory, there are often causes for things. FDR said if something happens in politics, you can bet somebody wanted to make it happen. And so it's actually throwing sand in your face to say, no, don't look over there. Kennedy was just murdered by a random lone gunman, when all the evidence is to the contrary.
We're going to have Dan, Linda, Larry, and then Blake. Dan.
Just the bill when you're ready.
I thought you nailed it when you said that the dichotomy was not left versus right. I think that left versus right dichotomy is used by the ruling class to keep people at this level divided. I think there's much more commonality between all the third parties because they want grassroots action, they want more community action, and I think once we can get past that left-right dichotomy and start looking at it as rulers and ruling class versus those that are being ruled,
right.
I think we're going to make some real progress.
Yeah, well, as I said, I first started seeing that with the South Park quotes, and but I've been analyzing that for some time. It's really both outmoded and inaccurate, and I mean, it just doesn't apply.
But people still buy
Yeah,
it.
I know, it's, yeah.
Yeah. You're absolutely-
That would be really nice to be able to get away with that, or get that one gone. But
Yeah, thanks for that.
yeah,
Linda, then Larry, then Blake, and then Frank, and then somebody else had their hand up and I didn't catch it. Nobody else, okay. Linda, you're up.
Oh, okay. I'd like to hear what you think about a trend in Americans to reject experts. You know, we have people who are religious, but we also have people who don't believe their doctor about vaccinations. And some of American history seems to be there seems to be a thread of people rejecting authorities. We reject George III, and we don't really want an expert in the White House.
right.
So we seem to be kind of two minds about these things.
Well, to me, I sort of mentioned that briefly in passing. It's if the authority doesn't fit your belief system or your underlying authority, then you reject it, which to somebody else out there looks like you're rejecting authority, but you're actually accepting another authority. Now, for example, a lot of people, the science is settled about global warming and 97% of scientists agree and so on. But if you look at subjects like GMOs or fracking or vaccinations or something like that, they don't support science. The science is actually very robust, but they reject it because it doesn't fit with their underlying.
So their
philosophy.
naturopath has more authority than their
Right,
physician.
right. They're still an authoritarian, but it's a different one. And they can pick and choose sometimes, depending on what seems to work, which to me is totally hypocritical, but you know, consistency isn't part of...
We'll take science when it flies
Yes.
us to Chicago, but
Right.
not other. Ralph,
Yes?
you wanted to know about science and truth? Or
Yes,
something like
because
that?
we've had a discussion, and for as far as I can tell, there was a discussion between, and where you were using science and truth as synonyms, and I was saying, and I got that wrong. Okay, so
Truth to me is a religious concept, not a science.
Philosophical?
Well, you could call it that too, but it's not scientific. There's no truth in science.
Science deals in evidence, and just as you were talking about robust science,
Right.
evidence, there can be weak evidence, and that's why there's not really authority, because we're trying to sort out what
Right.
has the best evidence.
Right.
And shows it.
Like the labels thing, people think of science as a thing. You either have it or you don't, or it says this or it does.
Yeah,
It's
I would put
actually
some of that
a
in
way
there.
of understanding things in a very diverse spectrum of degrees of understanding with no absolute endpoint.
You know, that's methodology? Would you call it a methodology?
That's its mechanism, yeah. It's a way of understanding things in the real world rather than philosophy, which is basically thinking about things and it doesn't matter what the real world.
Well, there are pragmatic philosophies.
Well, yeah.
Pragmatism by William James.
It used to be that everything was philosophy, and then science came out of that, and okay, this is science and everything else is philosophy. And to some extent there's still sort of that, but I agree there are some practical philosophies.
Literally, it means love of wisdom philosophy. So.
Well, a
It's-
lot of things like psychology and sociology and so on are really pretty far from science, in spite of what certain experts would tell you. But
okay, it's Larry, Blake, Frank and
Oh,
Ken, Larry.
Did we get to see all of Scott's slides?
Yeah, we got to see all of Scott's
Okay,
slides.
so this is a free-for-all.
Yes.
Good.
Yes.
Sort of free. I prefer if it was not a free-for-all. Okay, so Larry, you're up.
Well, just to follow up on the points that were just being made, the way I think about science, okay, and I count myself as a scientist on this basis.
Please speak up, Larry.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I think I'm speaking loudly.
I can hear you.
I regard it as a methodology, and it's a methodology of going from observation to explanation, okay, and presumably an explanation that actually fits the observation. And one of the things that I think most children are doing at the earliest of ages that might affect their trajectory, either toward authoritarianism or to the contrary, I think is in those early years where they are exploring and observing and attempting to form a methodology for science or for explanation, excuse me. Right? And hopefully they become little scientists in at least their method of thinking. But what I'm afraid of right now is the authoritarians who are in control of the society. In fact, I don't know of any society that isn't in control of them. That this particular one, this drive toward universal preschool, which is taking away from the parents not only the responsibilities of the parents, but taking them and putting them into an institution, and institutionalizing them and making them think in terms of the institution rather than what can I do in this world? And they control their observations, they control their behaviors. It's authoritarian from top to bottom.
Yep.
Maybe we're getting into the state now or condition now, where people cannot afford to live unless they are separated from their child rearing responsibilities. As a consequence, I think maybe we are on a trajectory where authoritarianism is inevitable.
Yeah. One thing in relation to that, and I think I mentioned this before, another reason that I thought of myself as non-authoritarian is that when I was asked as a kid what I wanted to be when I grew up, I said scientist. That's that type of thinking that you described. That was the way I was. I don't think I got it from somebody or learned it. Again, that's still kind of vague, but that's what I see. And I agree with you that if you get authorities, religious does this too. If you get religious education, you've got an authority telling you how the world works and what's real and all these things right from the get-go. It's be a little hard to break away from that.
It's Blake, then Frank, then Ken.
So before I ask Scott a question, I want to address something that Larry just said. And you paint with a broad brush preschool education and early childhood educators. I actually happened to own a preschool for 10 years back in the 80s, and we were I didn't realize I was a libertarian back then. Well, maybe I did, but it was after I
didn't recognize libertarianism.
I did, but I've put forth that philosophy, and there's many preschools, like Montessori preschools, that don't train people to be something, they train them to be
Want me to give you change?
So that's something to think about.
Do you think the government preschools will be that way?
I can't agree about what you were saying, but anyway, that's something to think about. Now the question I wanted to ask you, Scott, it has to do with, you talk about authority figures. We talk about looking to authority. And I think about in nature, and I don't want to anthropomorphize animals, but we talk about the alpha male. So do you see any correlation between authority within the animal kingdom, and that be a basis of why we tend to look at authority in our life?
Well, that's a very good question, and we are fundamentally animals. There's nothing really totally unique or totally human. I could argue that it's consciousness and self-awareness and things like that, but that's a good point. That may well be where it comes from, is that aspect of that we see in animals where they defer to authority. Like,
Are you aware of any studies where animals have belief systems, or they exhibit the concept of a belief system?
No, no. That'd be an interesting question.
There's some fairness studies in chimpanzees about what's fair and what's not fair. There's a very clear set of science that of their behavior when they're treated unfairly compared to other chimpanzees.
Yeah.
So there is fairness.
Interesting.
It's Frank and then Ken.
Two comments. One, you mentioned the spectrum from anti-authoritarianism to authoritarianism, and that to me seems to be very familiar as the world's smallest political quiz, from, granted they're labeling it libertarian at the top, but let's hope someday we manage to go from the left-right spectrum to top-bottom spectrum. The other is from a Myers-Briggs perspective. The entities, intuitive thinkers, are about an eighth of the population, which is about 12%, which is kind of close to 15% that you're mentioning. Do you think there's any correlation there?
Well, the basis for my 15% is not anything real scientific. It's kind of my opinion based on what I've seen in things like that and other commentaries on that. And as I say, about 10–15% of people are left-handed, and I mean, there's some other things that might correlate that, but I really don't have a hard.
We should just trust you in authority.
Yeah, right. Yeah. No, that's why I started out saying, these are just my ideas. Don't take them as even necessarily original.
We have the gentleman behind you who wishes to speak.
Larry raised the question about preschool and state-sponsored preschool. The earliest indication of that I know is Plato, who favored taking babies born and raising them by the state so they would get state propaganda and never question it. So that ideas have been around for a long, long time. One of the systems I like is Alvin Toffler's, where he talks about the third wave. The first wave was agriculture, and that's not just economic, that's the total society. Then it shifted into industrial, where in 1950 we had two political parties, the party of labor and the party of business or management. And now we have the third wave with 1,000 special interest groups all lobbying for their legislation. And I think we are freer. We're not moving more toward authoritarianism. We are getting more options. Some of that is economic options. And it's calling into question our status school system, because now we have many more paths to follow. And then finally, I'd like to agree with Linda on science. Capital T truth is religious. It's taken on faith. It cannot be questioned. Lowercase t truth comes out of science where the evidence supports something. The key issue coming from Karl Popper was falsifiability. You set up an experiment. If it is falsified, you go back to the drawing board. If it is confirmed, that's a lowercase t truth. It's true for now. It's tentatively true until somebody comes along with a better experiment that upends it. And in that case, you can be the Pope or the janitor. The question is, how strong is your evidence?
Right. I would agree with you on that, but that term truth is so used and abused that I don't accept it for what you're saying, although you're correct. You are, I mean, you could use the word in that sense, small t, but anybody to me who uses it is to be questioned. But I want to say one thing about the education thing. What I see happening in medicine is that as the government takes over more control and authority of medical services, you're going to see the same sort of thing you see in education, and that is people who don't accept the government school system will have their kids educated privately, private schools, assuming they can afford it or find some way to do that. And you're going to see the same thing in medicine. People who don't accept the government system will find healthcare services outside the system, and not necessarily conventional ones, but they will find their own way rather than accept the government authority on medical services.
We have Larry next. Is there anybody else? Hold on one second. Marty. I apologize. Come on.
Switch you. Let's switch to you.
All right. So it's Larry and then Yana. Did you want to speak? Okay. And then I see.
Just a real quick reaction to something that occurred to me while I was listening
Please
to
speak
that.
up.
Okay. The judicial system is supposed to render justice, correct? Okay. And with respect to the comments that were made about truth with a capital T, okay, I would remind people that if you testify in court, you take an oath. What does the oath do?
Good question. Defers to an authority.
And okay, Larry, are you finished with that?
Yes.
Okay, Yana.
So let's see, I have several thoughts. So I think I always believed in God, and I wasn't raised religious. My parents talked about it, and for some reason I'm totally against authoritarianism of any kind, and I would never try to push or even try to focus on how people this. But I'm an optimist. I know I have who never try to push their beliefs on me because they're don't coincide the way my God is not authoritarian. And there are people who pull me up they'll tell because I don't believe in atheism. So I think I don't like to paint people with a broad brush. I think everybody's kind of doing their own inner searching, and some people are, holding more to a structure than others, and I'm not judging anybody, but
The problem, if I can interrupt, the problem is when they change from taking their beliefs and using a power like government to force them on other people. You can believe whatever you want to believe, and that's perfectly fine. As long as you don't force your beliefs on somebody else, we don't have a problem.
I mean, and overall, I think people who are more on the left politically in that day and age are actually trying to push their will more than the people who are on the right, because the people on the right kind of realize that they don't have the freedom to worship. I mean, the fact that somebody else doesn't have the freedom to do what they want to do, they're not going to have the freedom either. But somebody said this to me that from a perspective of kind of a more new age spirituality, that truth is whatever you feel in your body is true. Like if you say something and kind of you don't reject it, that's close to your truth. But I think everybody has their own truth, and you have to be careful that everybody has their own truth.
Well, my point there is that's why there's no absolute truth.
Right.
It's always relative.
Well, I happen to think the world is functioning as a paradox. I do believe there are an absolute truth, and I think we don't see it.
Well, again,
but I'm not going to tell anybody I know what it is.
Like I say, you can believe that. So it's like the issue I've seen debated about whether a scientist can be religious, can believe in God. Well, yeah, I mean.
Well, what's
it's-
interesting on that point, because I was just going to make that point, most scientists, and I've read a lot of history of science, actually believe in God in a non-religious kind of way.
Yeah.
Not all of them.
Right.
Which I think is interesting. And, you know, a lot of people from the New Age spirituality perspective, they talk about quantum mechanics and things like that, that, you know, higher intelligence or coherence or things like that. But, just one more interesting thing. So a few days ago, because I participate in all kinds, not a lot of them, but I'm doing some meditations here at it's called Caritas. I don't know if any of you heard about it on Replogle. They're generally very liberal people and politics, but there is a group that I've been going to every couple of weeks with some people apparently are really worried about what's going on in the country and they're fearful and they want to get together, and that's not the reason I just want to communicate with people at all kinds of perspectives. And this guy a few days ago, last week, was presenting out this idea. He thinks that Ubuntu, I don't know if you heard about this tribal existence. A guy from South Africa, a professor, made a party, and it's basically, in my mind, very much like communism. I mean, they want to eliminate money and give them a common blah. And they consider that that's freedom. Most of these people tend to vote Democrat, which makes more laws and bigger government, and because they don't like it, they want to get exceptions and reject it. So I think there's a lot, it seems to me like there's quite a bit of that going on in this country, and it's just something to be aware of. Because this guy, and he's a really nice guy, I mean, I like, you know, it's just, I got a little creeped out because I grew up in communists, but anyway. He was talking that he's talking to city council members to get a piece of land here in Colorado to have a community like that, and they don't even like police, and they would like have a council of elders telling them how to live within the community, and supposedly they're going to take care of all their needs. Now, some things, I mean, I agree with them that they're frustrated with the government and they want more freedom. I totally heard that, and I told them, I said, well, if you want to work together to get down the government control, I'm totally for that. I'm not in favor of people carving out exceptions and then fighting with the government and the police. But anyway, that's just something there.
Okay, Yana, we have several more people who wish to speak. I apologize for cutting you off. We have two gentlemen behind, I'm sorry, one gentleman behind you, then Blake, and then another gentleman behind you. So it is you. Okay.
So, yeah, I would definitely be curious about this issue of genetics, nature versus nurture. Since I think a lot of folks, unfortunately, are taught science as sort of a fait accompli, they're handed a body of knowledge. And it makes sense if they just come into something, you know nothing about it, then other people seem to have all the answers. For people to just view that as an authority. Versus, I was fortunate enough to learn much of my early science from reading folks like Isaac Asimov, who traced the history of science, and they showed the dead ends, and they showed the fact that science is a self-correcting process that makes mistakes, and so and that it isn't authoritative or authoritarian. And a lot of folks are never exposed to that, so it makes sense, unfortunately. So I don't know how much your school system is indoctrinating people, even without thinking about politics, just in how they teach things like science.
Well, that's a good subject, good question. And on the issue of nature, nurture, and genetics and environment, I've always been about 70% genetic and about 30% environment. And it's obviously not all one or the other, and they interact and so on. And that's actually not too far from my 85% and 15% in terms of you know, the difference in authoritarians and non-authoritarians. But I think the point is that's always been a debate, and there is no simple answer to it. Is what it comes down to.
Because science is what you do is a search for truth that we never reach it, sort of like infinity. It's out there someplace, whereas the religious concept is you can't find it.
Right.
But I think also in terms of this mission of not trusting the experts, I think that goes along with people not knowing enough to evaluate who's an expert and who isn't.
Right.
That's sort of the mixed blessing that as we develop a larger body of knowledge, there's more temptation to teach it as a fait accompli, so people trust authorities, but then they don't know enough to know which authority to trust.
Well, what I'm saying is it's very difficult for most people to have no authority.
Oh,
to
yeah,
accept,
that's
to not accept anybody as being the authority, not just you versus you. It's
Well, yeah, I think
don't
that's-
accept anybody as
yeah,
being.
I think that's the biggest thing, to be able to not have an answer. But most people
Right.
have to have an answer. That science is able to reserve judgment and say we don't know.
Right.
And most people just are not comfortable with that.
That's right.
They have to have an explanation.
Good point. I should definitely add that.
It's going to be Blake, then the gentleman to your left. So let's go to Blake. Oh, before we do Blake, I need to shut this down for just a minute or 30 seconds. So please, because I'm just file size. Recording again. Blake, you're up.
So I meant to ask this earlier, but we kind of got off on other things. But I still am curious about it, and I also want to ask a question about what was just said by the gentleman behind you. Degrees of authoritarianism. Okay, are there degrees of authority or authoritarianism, or is it black and white? You're authority or you're not authority?
No, I hope you can tell from what I've said that it's not black and white. Yes, there are definitely degrees of that. I'm really talking about the concept in general, not that everybody is.
So even some of us who consider ourselves libertarian might be somewhat authoritarian. in some
Yeah,
aspects.
well, we just heard a good example. I'm a libertarian, but I believe in God.
Right.
Okay. I don't see any problem with that, as I say. It's just only people who think God is their authority and someone's speaking for them on earth, and they use that to force their belief on you.
The other part of my question has to do with what the gentleman just said a moment ago, and that's about experts. Are experts authorities? Are authorities experts? Totally separate things. Do they overlap at all, like in a Venn diagram, or they're just totally
Well,
separate?
that's a good. I'm using authority as the more philosophical general term, whereas expert tends to be more scientific or more based on what they've actually done. But that's a good point. No, I wouldn't consider them identical terms. Not even someone who's viewed as an expert or even thinks of themselves as an expert may not view themselves as an authority. Whereas some authorities have no expertness, but they're still an authority, at least to some people, or in their own mind.
Like the thug on North Korea.
Yeah, right. Okay.
It's gentleman over there.
The 7 bases for authority was taught to me by Jan French, who's a longtime libertarian in Denver. And some of them I didn't agree gave any authority. That's probably because I'm anti-authoritarian. But there are different things that people call on to have authority. In terms of nature versus nurture, I have a 3-part split: nature, nurture, and choice. Start out with a third for each of them, and then we can argue around. Because as libertarians, we grow up and no longer are trapped by our environmental guidance or our genetic limitations. We can choose our own path.
Right. And genetics you can't choose. Environmental things you have some choices.
They're thrust onto you, and you might pick them up naturally, but you might say, hey, I'm going to change continents or change my name or do whatever. Science and spiritual ways of knowing things. Science took a wrong turn after James Clerk Maxwell. What is cited as his equations, they were dumbed down and perverted, and that is what makes up university physics now. In the military black budget operations, they have a broader view of things, and those are important to look at. So science is very robust. It's just that sometimes the authorities guide it away from the truth because of political agendas. In terms of communes, a libertarian would say it is fine to have a commune if you choose it. It is not fine if you take the whole country and nationalize everything. Many of us might have opinions about whether it will work out well or badly, and there's now a whole body of literature on how communes have worked out.
Larry, I'm going to have you be the next to last speaker. I'll be the last speaker. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. I just had.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was talking to Larry Sarner. Larry,
What,
do you have
a
a comment, Larry Goodman?
Yeah, two comments that I happened to think of after I got done talking.
Okay.
One was that on that website, another website is the Four Corners Doctrine to go to, and on our website there are numerous. There is a specific button for Colorado there. The other thought that occurred to me was that our county commissioners have willfully neglected their duties, and they are required to check all the county bonds of the county officers and make sure they are sufficient. And not only are they not doing that, they've allowed attorneys to come in and control them and be part of the county commissioners, and also dictate, be advisors to them. And of course the attorneys are saying, oh no, you don't need bonds. So,
Larry Sarner, and then Ralph, and I'll wrap up. Larry.
A quick comment on some of what occurred here.
Please speak up.
In fact, I take some exception to the notion that we each have our own truth, and there's a lot of discussions been generated by an Atlantic article, the Atlantic article by Kurt Anderson, about whether or not America has lost its mind. And one of the things I've seen persistently on public TV is, especially, when they're in fundraising mode, which is practically all the time anymore, that they produce or they start presenting or representing things from people like I call them deep pockets, Chopra. And he had one on last night. I just saw that it was on. I didn't actually watch it as usual. And it says it's called "You Are the Universe," which in effect is well, more than that. Even the program notes saying you create the universe. Right? There's got to be some line that's drawn between we each have our own truth, and whether it's the same thing. As I wrote, just jotted down in reaction to just seeing the existence of that program, I said, why would anybody who might be watching actually would have wanted to create the universe with Donald Trump as president?
Okay, Ken, can you make it quick because
Yes.
I want to wrap up.
I want to make reference to Kenneth Golding, who wrote a wonderful book called The Image in the 1950s. It was later renamed Memes, and Richard Dawkins stole credit for it, but it's all Golding saying we have a mental map of the world in our heads. Said even an amoeba knows the difference between a piece of food and a piece of sand. And so in the question, do dogs or other animals have belief systems, he would argue, yes, their pattern of making choices is driven by their belief system.
And I'm going to wrap this up. Prior to wrapping it up, I'm going to ask for an enormous amount of applause for Scott. Dear God, Scott, that was a lot more fascinating than I thought it was going to be. That really was quite astonishing and thought-provoking. I'm going to wrap up by simply saying that it's been repeated in history over and over again that God is that which you do not understand. So, with that, I'm going to wrap up.
Okay.
And again, thank you so much, Scott.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.